Hey everybody, this is Beyond Range, and today we are going to be using GTO Wizard, and we're kind of just going to get into another training session and see what happens. We're just playing single race pots. We didn't really play any particular position, so we'll be playing defense and offense. Our opponent is already starting to use a large sizing. We'll get through this quickly again. So ace, king, 9, our opponent has nuts advantage, equity advantage. He's already using a large sizing. Our particular combo is already kind of in some deep shit. We're already like, oh no, we're not very happy. If we're calling all of our ace X, if we're calling all of our king X, if we're calling all of our 9X, and we're calling all of our queen Jack, Jack 10, then we're kind of just putting in a lot of money with kind of weak range. So this kind of combination already is like not particularly thrilled. This is like a hand that is probably close to indifferent. And when you look at like, okay, we got the king jack that's indifferent, you start to think about which particular ones are more efficient to be calling or more efficient to be folding, right? So you might say, okay, well, we have the jack of diamonds. That might mean that we have more EV overall because it's more likely that he has something like the jack of clubs, and that means that when backdoor flush draws come in, we aren't going to be having to face so many good hands or whatever, basically. Or you could say that the king of spades is good because we know that he's not going to have king x of spades, and he can't have ace x of spades given the ace of spades is on the board. So when these kind of flushes come in, we're kind of protected. So we don't want to fold this one. Maybe we want to fold another kind of king jack. There's some sort of logic that you can think in these terms. But yeah, you don't have to go so deep into it. You can kind of just click a little bit faster and just get the big picture idea. So we're on the ace king 9, and the board pairs, the turn is the 9. Our opponent has a decent amount of 9x as well, for what it's worth. He doesn't just check them all. But because he has so many nuts, he actually has to like find efficient bluffs, and some of the efficient bluffs are just to start betting a 9, because a lot of our range to defend against triple barrel is going to be pocket 9s, king 9, ace 9, so he almost wants to block that, and he doesn't want to do that too often, but it gets into his range a bit. Also, when we end up reopening the turn here, our opponent still has a large nut advantage, and whenever we put money in, he now has the option to raise. And then also when we check, our opponent now has the option to polarize against our weaker range, given we have to sort of strengthen our range by choosing to bet. We're not just going to bet everything. Not that you couldn't, but because of the advantages, it wouldn't really make sense in this particular spot. So your range is going to do a huge amount of check. Now, again, you also are trying to take away the risk that he could be doing this thing like check back. So you do want to potentially use some turn bets that are small, but again, you don't want to just blindly do it. You want to understand what hands have incentive and yada yada yada. Our hand on the river, specifically our range on the river, is going to have, a lot of the 9x, a lot of hands like queen jack, and we do have a lot of strong hands. Our opponent doesn't have that many strong hands, but he will end up having some slow plays just because of the fact that he has incentive to have slow plays, in the sense that we're supposed to put in a bunch of money with our good hands, and that will actually mean that the EV of slow playing should be fairly similar. Not should be fairly similar. It is really supposed to be, but then it depends on how he thinks that we're playing. So on the river, this hand class is not efficient to be putting money in with. If we had a bluff, if we wanted to bluff a hand here that was representing our 9x or queen jack, whatever that made sense, well, a king wouldn't really be very efficient to be doing it, because it would be beating some of his hands that we would show down against, like jack 10, queen 10, etc. It would be more efficient for us in our position to be turning like a 10 into a bluff, basically, not something like king jack or king queen. And yeah, you can see our river strategy is very clear, that we're going to be playing very big bet, and we're going to be playing check. You can take a look at the equity graph, and it basically makes sense, because we're trying to eke out EV with this part of our region. And once we end up calling a very large flop bet, it looks like a great spot for him, but the issue is that he basically filtered out the weakest parts of our range. He's betting big with a lot of different hands, just all sorts of stuff, whereas when we call, you can see our calling range is pretty strong, right? And that's what he forces himself to play against after he goes big bet and we get to this node. But still, at the same time, it doesn't really make that much sense for us to be going with too many small bets with these hands because we're kind of, facing a lot of queen jack. We're facing a lot of nuts that also get here. And apparently he doesn't have very much 9x slow play at all, which was he doesn't really have much 9x from this position to begin with, and he had the 9x that he did have, he just continued betting the turn because it had so much equity. And apparently we're not really, I mean, I didn't think that we were continuing a ton of 9x on the flop. I thought we had to fold like a lot of 9x on the flop, to be honest. Like queen 9 off is pure folding, jack 9 off is pure folding, and these are the 9x that don't have the two pair. Of course, these other 9x that have backdoor flush draws, the thing is they can end up making the nuts against a hand like pocket kings or aces, so they become a different tier of value. They're not the same as just a 9, right? But they're very, very valuable because they can have 100% equity or like 90 something percent equity against our opponent's range at some point in the future, whereas this kind of jack 9, yeah, it's not really going to happen like that, and it's not going to be clean enough. Like even if the 9 pairs when you have jack 9, it's not going to be clean enough to want to put shit tons of money in. So we're going to move on to the next hand. The queen 9-5. Yeah, our opponent just has decent equity, decent advantage in terms of nuts. The turn card is such that, yeah, our opponent has an advantage. He has like ace king, ace jack, ace 10. His range is also a little bit weighted toward that, whereas we are actually uncapped because we didn't split at any point. We do have a little bit more nuts, but then, yeah, mostly a lot of our range is just going to be like weak, and it doesn't make sense for us to be having very many bets here except like very large bets. Those are pretty efficient. River is a jack, and at this point, our range is going to have some of those nuts, some of those slow plays that didn't end up betting at this point. It's going to have a decent amount of those, and then it's going to have a decent amount of the ace-x, and then some of the weaker hands. So you probably want to have some large bets, and you probably want to have some smaller bets, and then you want to have some checks. Now, for this particular hand, our hand is a bluff, so we can think about how much value we have and what the best blockers are. Do we bluff everything? Well, no, we have our entire range here, and we have a bunch of shit, so we're not going to bluff everything. We're going to try to think about what the most efficient hands to be bluffing are. So I think that we want to be blocking his calling range, right? When you're thinking about what priority hands you want to bluff, you don't want to block hands that are auto folds, and you kind of want to block hands that are auto or mixed calls. That's pretty efficient. And you can see that the 8-6 is mostly going to be blocking a lot of hands that are very easy folds. If you ended up having a heart here, if you ended up having sort of like a big card, like if you had something like King 2 suited, King 2 might be pretty good because you would kind of unblock a lot of his medium pairs, right? And you would also do a decent job of kind of like blocking something like King 10 or Ace King or Ace Jack, or just unblocking other stuff that might continue. You don't really know. There's like many ways to look at this, and it's not so clear how your opponent's going to respond either. But just starting with the theoretical framework is a decent thing, because you might find out, oh, this guy just always bets the turn with an ace, and he's always bet King 10, and most of the King Jack is already betting, and he's really mostly going to have weak pairs. So like never bluff 8-6 because it's totally blocking his under pairs. But then again, some guys, maybe that's not the case, and it matters less, and you just want to bluff everything. Yeah, again, we're playing. Our opponent goes with the check back. Yeah, strong card for our opponent. But given his actual check back, he's a little bit weaker. We 3-bet, the ace queen. He's going to be c-betting something like pocket kings. He will have a decent amount of king 10. He should technically have some queen 9, ace queen, or else we just can start going crazy with our queen 9 and ace queen. But yeah, this hand is really good to go with the turn check, and this hand is really good to go with the turn check fold. Apparently, we are playing turn check call with pocket 8s, and that is just ridiculously surprising. Like, that is insanely surprising that that's happening. Because I'm pretty damn holy Holy shit. This is such like a fundamental situation that you would think that you would just know which. I mean, I'm kind of assuming that I would just kind of get these, but I didn't actually think that the eights was going to be um, indifferent on the turn. I actually thought that even like the weaker 10x would end up being more indifferent, the weaker Jack X. So my understanding here is a little bit weak, and I wonder what our opponent's play ends up being in this spot. I just want to take a look at the advantages. Yeah. These are the strategies. So interesting. So interesting. Wow. We need to be very aggressive about defending this spot. And I didn't realize how aggressive we actually need to be about defending this situation. I'm pretty damn shocked. And it kind of means that I've probably like memorized a bunch of heuristics, but I've not thought about the ranges that deeply. And I mean, even he's like betting the turn Jack 9 for 2/3. I didn't realize that he would be going that thin. I know that there's not like, okay, so think about it. Queens is like, betting the flop. Aces is betting the flop. He doesn't have that much. King X here. But I just didn't think like this is how it's going to work. Like, oh, we're going to, call that. I still am very confused. And I probably should just like pause it and think and then figure it out. But it's like I'm on video, and then every single video I make, I just keep not posting because I just keep talking too long. And yeah, that's kind of, it's fine, but I feel like it's maybe a little bit too much, like not enough hands. Yeah, here basically on the flop, our hand can either take the raise option or the call option, and then on the turn here, our hand needs to fold. If we're continuing 10-9 offsuit here, when we have a bunch of hands like spades, we have stuff like 8x, we have stuff like 6x. We're kind of going to give them too much incentive to just go big with their value. We're not going to be folding enough. So again, you want to just try to play defensively and well in these situations. So again, this is going to be a spot where our opponent has the equity advantage, and our opponent is going to be trying to, you can say he has an overall stronger army, but we in the big blind are going to have more kind of nuts and future nuts. The ace of spades is out there, meaning that he'll have less flushes. A lot of our ace x of spades are 3-betting, but we have a lot of weaker spades like 8-6 of spades, 6-4 of spades, this kind of stuff. So we will be having more advantages in the flushes in the future. In addition to that, more straight draws. We have stuff like Jack 10 offsuit. A lot of stuff like even 10-8 offsuit might be in this range pre-flop. I think that's reasonable to be calling here. I would be calling a decent bit if the rake is not that high. Yeah, so apparently 10-8 offsuit is in the bet or is in the pre-flop range, but it's not calling that often. That makes sense. It's 500 NL rake. So you can kind of see how in the future there's going to be a lot of strong hands for the big blind. So in position does a really good job by just like checking a lot here. That's one of the ways that they exercise their advantages, not by bloating pots against a range that really wants to just pile in money early. And yeah, so we're going to be facing a lot of checks, given that our opponent is saying, hey, I'm condensed, and we are saying, hey, we are still uncapped because we have all of our hands that got to the flop. So we're going to be using a lot of turnover bets, and we're going to be using a lot of checks. And that's going to be the main thing that makes sense in this situation. This hand is very easy to check fold on the turn. So yeah, we'll do one more hand and then we'll call this a session. Now the board is ace, jack, 5, two-tone. The turn is a 6. Again, we are more nutted. We have more nuts. The top end part of our range, let me just grab something quickly, a visual. So let's think about our opponent checks back. Let's say this is the range that he has before he checks, and let's say his checking range, he takes this away. Let's say he takes this away, and let's say this is what he has now, mostly. Now, occasionally he'll have a little bit of air here, no problem. A little bit of air here, damn terrible visuals. I apologize. But you get the main idea, right? And let's say our range actually just has the whole thing. So we still have these nuts, right? This is what's happening, okay? We still have the whole thing. Now, we can go, I don't want to go too deep in here, but the point is that what is pretty efficient, given that we have these hands right here that are super nutted, 90-something% equity, well, we probably want to be betting them a lot, because if we still check them and our opponent sees, oh, he still has the nuts, he's going to continue doing a bunch of checking. If our range is too strong here, he's going to continue checking a lot, right? But if our range is too weak here, if we just chop this out and we just say, oh, we have these hands here now, well, our opponent's going to start betting this part of his range a lot. So our nuts, if we check too many nuts, if we bet too many nuts, this is going to give our opponent certain strategic incentives, right? So let me exit this out. So the point is, yes, you have this range out of position and you have these hands that want to bet. Well, you're probably going to want to use large sizings because these have a lot of equity, right? It's not like you're going to be betting your entire range here because your opponent has a lot of stuff like ace X. You're not just going to want to be betting a random jack every single time. If you bet all the king queen, all the queen 10, all the king 10, etc., you're going to be betting a lot. If you bet all your flush draws, all your straight draws like 9-8, 9-7, well, you're going to be betting too often, right? You're putting in too much money. So what you'll find is you're doing a lot of check in this situation. And again, this is just not an efficient hand to be betting. You can think about what's happened with ranges again. So he's narrowed his range by checking. We narrowed our range on the turn by not betting. We had less nuts after we checked. We still have a lot of air to get to this part of the tree, and our opponent has basically declined to bet to this point. So he has a lot less nuts. And we can think about, oh, well, we have some strong hands that do want to bet. And we have probably a lot of weaker hands that want to get to showdown or bluff. And sometimes we'll have some medium hands. You can think about organizing a range. This king queen is very efficient to just check because we're actually going to have a non-zero amount of EV. We're going to end up beating some parts of this range like king 10 on the river and maybe like king 9, and that should end up like generating some EV to show down. If you're going to be bluffing, you don't want to be bluffing with a hand that already had good EV to show down unless your opponent is way over folding. It would be more efficient to use a hand that had 0 EV on showdown. So anyways, guys, this is Beyond Range. I love you all, and I'll see you next time.